So again, apologies for the aircon sounds in the background. It's kind of warm here. It's not as bad as it has been, but kind of warm. I have to say, from reading people's comments in the previous video, I'm blown away by how cold some of the places where you guys live are. We rarely get below freezing temperatures here where I live. If you go further south in Australia, down towards Tassie, down towards Melbourne, you will get a little bit below freezing, but not so much. So when I see the temperatures that people have been mentioning in their comments, it just blows my mind. So stay warm, people. So let's move on to this video. Well, actually, before I move on to this video, I just want to mention something. Now, in the last couple of videos, I've been asking people to subscribe, and super keen to try and reach that 4,000 subscribers mark. And someone commented in my previous video that they had actually discovered that YouTube had unsubscribed them from my channel. So, worth knowing, if you think you're subscribed to my channel, probably worth checking that you are actually subscribed, and if not, resubscribe. That way you'll also get notifications for every time I drop a video, because sometimes with the really long ones like this is probably going to be, by the time I've spent all day just getting all the clips together, it means that it tends to be posted later than usual. So if you are subscribed, you'll know when to expect these videos to drop. Also, huge thank you to everyone who is subscribed. You help me to keep the motivation going. Thank you to all the members, all the people who've joined my Patreon. And if you are not aware, I've created a Patreon for people to use. It's a free join up. There's no fees. If you want to support me, there is a $1 and a $2 tier. But if you just want to join my Patreon and have access to any documents that I post, it's free. Likewise, 99% of the documents that I post are always going to be free. So as a member of my Patreon, a free member, you get documents, and I'm still adding to that on a daily basis. There are so many documents in this case that it is going to take me a while to get them all uploaded, and I know I haven't got any done today, but it's been a super busy day. So that's there. My Patreon is there for anyone who wishes to join. Huge thank you to those people who've joined the $1 and $2 tiers. It's great to have that support, but even just joining as a free member shows me that you're interested in my channel, and it shows support. Also, thank you to the people who've been giving me super thanks on my videos. Love you guys. Definitely appreciate that. And I appreciate all my members. I will aim to get another member video out within the next week. Hopefully, we've got another couple of really hot days coming up, which may impact on my ability to get my videos out on time, but I'll do my best. Now, let's actually move on to this video. So, in this video, I want to look at all the statements that have been made about Stinky driving Maddie to school. Now, we know that there's been a lot of lies said around this. His versions of how often he did it don't match with Jenn's versions, which don't match with Maddie's best friend's versions, etc. So I wanted to put them all together in one video and have a look at them and see what that actually means. Does this actually show us some indication of guilty knowledge on Jenn's part? And I'll explain that as I go along. But it's definitely an interesting thing to look at. So I'm going to start with Stinky first. Sorry, let's just get him out of the way. and then we'll listen to what Jen's got to say, and then there's a few more things at the end. So let's just jump in.
Got it. And it's my understanding that you dropped her off, like, a little bit away from school.
Yeah, she sometimes likes to get dropped off a bit down the road away. She likes to walk over and catch up with her friends, or just not being seen, getting out of a hoopty in front of school.
Okay. And when you say hoopty, you're referring to your...
car that she's embarrassed to be seen getting out of.
Got it. Okay.
So I will say, I think it's actually fair to say that Stinky is better at remembering his lies than Jenn is. Because we know this story pretty well by now. He dropped her off at the school because she wanted to walk, because she's embarrassed by his hoopty of a car. And he stuck with that story from the very beginning. Of course, the locations of where he dropped her varied with each telling, but that's not for this video. So the story here is that she liked to walk that mile from where he was dropping her off to school, and that she was far too embarrassed to be seen in his hoopty of a car.
How common is it of you to drop her off to school in the morning?
It's not common for me to do it most of the time, but I'm up here, and I'm helping out as much as I can and working, so she was trying to get as much sleep as possible.
So at this point in time, he doesn't actually mention how often he's done the school run before, but he says it's not common. When you say it's not common, that infers that you have done it before, but it's not something frequent. You wouldn't, if he'd never done it before, then he'd say, this is my first time. Or rarely, if he'd only done it once or twice. Saying it's not common tends to imply that it's more than just one or two times. Be interesting to see if this changes and how this changes.
So normally, if you do drop her to school in the morning, although it's typically not you, is that typically what she requests is to be dropped? Is that from everyone, or just because of your car?
She doesn't mind getting dropped off much. It's the nicer white Sentra over there. But it is very common for her to get dropped off down the road and want to walk up and find her friends and kind of hang out.
It really, really irks me that this loser has the absolute temerity to constantly say these things about Maddie as if he's like someone with the right to do so, and someone who knows her more intimately than anyone else. We know this is an outright lie, him saying that it is very common for her to get dropped off down the road. We've heard from Jenn and from Sage that actually, no, she gets dropped off at the school. Jenn drives through the drop-off line, the pickup line, and drops her off at the front there. We also know that she meets her friends in the school grounds. And I think most schools, I would imagine, have that policy that once kids arrive at school, they're not allowed to leave the school grounds. I'm just guessing at that, but in Australia, it's a standard thing, and I would imagine it would be common sense for it to be the standard thing in most schools in America too. Let me know what the situation is with that, but I would imagine, especially when you're talking middle school kids, that it would be frowned upon for them to leave the school grounds.
I take her to school in the morning so she can sleep in as much as possible.
Okay.
I agreed. I've done the school run a few times before. It's not usually my forte, but I don't mind helping.
So in this instance, he's saying that he's done the school run a few times before. But it is such an odd thing to say, it is not usually my forte. So you're saying you don't know how to drive, or you don't know how to find the school, or you don't know how to pull over on the side of the road so that someone can get out of the car? Like, I mean, how hard can it be? I mean, hello, you get in the car, you make sure you get ready on time, you get in the car, you drive to the school, you drop her off, you leave. Or in Stefan's case, you don't do any of those things, but you know what I mean. We're talking about a 13-year-old child who should be more than capable of getting herself ready of a morning before school. Maybe the occasional reminder to keep moving so that you'll be on time. But she would know her own school routine. So there's really not a huge requirement there for someone if they are getting Maddie to school. So it's a really dumb comment.
Is she familiar with that parking lot at all? Is that somewhere she hangs out?
I mean,
or
a lot of the kids will sort of rendezvous there before heading into school.
Gotcha. Do you recall seeing any other kids walking in the area when you were dropping her off?
We were early. Earlier than usual. She was confident that it was fine. She was just going to hang out and wait for her friends.
Okay. Did she mention that to you at all? Or did she say anything?
I asked her, because we were a little early. We still had some time to go. I said, "You want me to wait with you?" She said, "No, just drop me right here. I'm going to walk up and find my friends."
Okay.
Which is something that she normally does anyway. It wasn't out of the ordinary, and I agreed to it. Seemed like she was making her way towards the school.
So he's been asked basically if Maddie is familiar with being dropped off at that church parking lot or being in that church parking lot. And he's like makes it sound like it's something that she does quite frequently, and that, she likes to go and find friends and hang out with friends. It's something that she normally does. That's essentially what he's trying to say here. But we know from Maddie's friends that they actually meet her either at the school gate, presumably that's if she's walking from her grandmother's house or grandmother's office, or presumably they meet her when she gets dropped off by Jenn up at the top of the school. So we've not heard any instances mentioned by anybody else of her being dropped off anywhere other than at the school. And yet he just has to extend the story and make it sound like, oh, well, she does it because she likes to meet up with her friends. No, Stinky, she doesn't meet with her friends outside of the school grounds. I think we've established that quite clearly.
She said she was going to go wait for her friends. She was going to find them and hang out and wait for her friends. And I asked if that was going to be okay. She said, yeah, it's fine. Kids get dropped off early enough as it is. It's not totally unusual for that to happen. It's just not usually that early that I drop her off. I do school runs every once in a while for her.
I think it shows how accustomed this loser is to making up BS stories and telling lies that he's actually able to remember his story and pretty much reproduce the same story. So this time he says he drops her off every once in a while. Well, that still fits in with it, it not being common or a few times before. It's still a very vague thing. He doesn't want to be too committal, but he's trying to say, well, it's not something that's super, super regular, but it does happen. And he's still pushing this notion of her wanting to just hang with her friends, and that's what the kids normally do in the area. So I will give it to him. He's good at being consistent with his lies. I think he's more consistent with his lies than Jenn. But at the same time, well, you know, if his mouth is moving, we know he's lying.
And she walked from there to the school?
Yeah.
It's a pretty long way.
It's maybe a block or so, but it's not out of the ordinary for her. She likes to do that sometimes. She likes the cold weather. She was wearing her hoodie. She likes the cold walks.
So you dropped her off near Lilac? Does that sound right?
Yeah, it wasn't at a cross street. It was just a bit of the sidewalk there.
So did you merge into the sidewalk, or did you stop in the middle of the street, or?
I just pulled over to the sidewalk there and let her hop out.
How often do you drop her off?
This might be the 5th or 6th time I've ever done it.
Okay. And when you drop her off, where do you normally drop her off at?
Normally down the street from the school. She requests that a lot.
Like the same area or somewhere else?
Especially if it's sometimes in the church parking lot, sometimes just wherever she tells us to let her out. As long as it's close, you know.
So now he's being a little bit more specific and saying that he's dropped her off 5 or 6 times. I guess that probably does fit in with every once in a while, a few times before, possibly not a few times before, because to me a few times before would imply less than 5 or 6 times. So I think he's trying to make his story more credible by giving more specific times. I think he realises what you see through all his interviews is that he does adapt as they interview him. So the more often they ask him about a specific thing, the more he tries to make it sound more specific. So he's still close to what he was originally saying, but I wouldn't go a few times as meaning 5 or 6. So you can see that, I guess, over time, when you say this story several times over, you may forget what you said in the beginning. But once again, we get the long story of her liking to do these long walks before school in the morning, which, of course, we know are complete utter BS.
Going back to school, how was she like on the car ride there?
Just calm down, sleeping along the way. She does that.
How often have you?
Not often, honestly. This might have been my 3rd or 4th morning school run. I'm not normally the one to do it.
And on the other occasions, has she had you drop her off in and around the same location, or how does that?
She has this image thing. I guess she only likes to be seen getting out of certain cars in front of the school. But I guess kind of a hoopty, and she's embarrassed by it.
Lincoln?
You know, I think it really reflects badly on Jenn when you compare the two interviews, or the interviews with the two different people. In Stearns' interviews, there are so many redactions where he actually uses Maddie's name, which sometimes makes it a little bit confusing to keep up with what's being said. Whereas when it comes to Jenn, we hardly ever have redactions, because she hardly ever uses her own daughter's name. Obviously that's not entirely relevant for this particular video, but to me it's still significant. So now he's changing it to only 3 or 4 times. So he's drawing it back a bit, heading back towards his original statement of not very common or a few times before. So I think he's kind of close to being consistent with his stories, but he still sucks, basically. We know it's all a load of BS. As for this whole notion of her being embarrassed to be seen in the car, now I didn't worry about getting the clip from Chris Stearns But we know full well that this is the very, very first time that Stefan has ever taken his father's car to kiss me, because his crappy little clunky Honda was falling apart. So it was basically decided that that car wasn't going to make it all the way to Kissimmee. So Chris apparently insisted on Stefan taking the Lincoln. And yet we have this consistent story from Jenn and Stefan that Maddie is embarrassed by Stefan's car. Well, this car wasn't even Stefan's car. This was a Lincoln. Far cry from a crappy little old Honda. Now, I probably could have saved us all a lot of pain and suffering and just played one or two of his clips, because for the most part his story pretty much stayed the same. He's only taken her a handful of times, and when he has, he's always dropped her off down the road from the school, not at the school because she's embarrassed to be seen in his car. Now, I pointed this out in another video, and it's not something that either him or Jenn ever mentioned, but the McDonald's is apparently, I think someone said it's about a mile from the school. Now, I don't know what the culture's like in America, but I know that in Australia, high school kids will head to McDonald's before and after school if it's near their school. So if she's so embarrassed about being seen in his car, why would she agree to go to McDonald's for breakfast, where anyone from her school could run into her and see her getting in and out of his hoopty, as he refers to it? It makes no sense. If you know a 13-year-old, you know that they're going to be consistent in their embarrassment. It's not going to just be about she doesn't want to be seen getting out of his car at school. At that age, it would be you wouldn't want to run into your friends anywhere getting out of his car. So this whole McDonald's story, we know it's BS anyway, but why was it so acceptable as part of a story? Why was even Jenn considering it to be acceptable when logically you know that Maddie would not want to be seen in his car at Macca's by any of her school friends, if we believe the story of her not wanting to be seen in his car? And, you know, let's be realistic. It's just a convenient part of the alibi. It's an excuse for being able to say, no, I didn't drop her off at the school because she's too embarrassed to mind my car. So I had to drop her off down the road. Because obviously it's going to be more credible to push the story of a child being abducted from outside of the school rather than at the school. Okay, so let's move on and start having a look at the statements made by Jenn. And I actually think that these are far more important to look at than what was said by Stinky. And I'll explain the reasoning behind that as we go through these.
She's embarrassed by his car. So she didn't want to be dropped off at school. She wanted to be dropped off like half a block away so she can walk.
It's an image thing. She's in the face.
But he dropped her off half a block away and drove away.
So I find it rather amusing that she hasn't had enough time to rehearse her story at this point in time. So when he interjects about Maddie going through a phase, it just completely blows her narrative out of the water, and she just kind of wraps it up really quickly because she's forgotten what the story's meant to be. But at this point in time, all we're getting from Jenn is that Maddie is embarrassed to be seen in Stearns' car, so she had him drop her off about half a block away. We know that it was, according to him, further than half a block away, and his story's been fairly consistent. So either Jenn has got the story wrong, or if we are to believe that Jenn knows nothing, then he's possibly given her a different story to the story that he has actually given detectives.
I think at this point I had called, before I went to the school, I actually called her best friend and I said, with you, I can't find her. She didn't walk to the office and she wasn't at school when I went to pick her up. She said she never made it. She's it's a first or second period. And I'm like, what do you mean? I dropped her off. We dropped her off close to school.
So we actually have a number of instances where Jenn says, we dropped her off at school, or we dropped her off close to school. But what's significant about this one is that in this one she says, what do you mean I dropped her off? Then she pauses, then she's like, or we dropped her off close to school. She has had enough time to register that saying I dropped her off is incorrect. You would expect her to then correct it with, well, Stefan dropped her off. Not to turn around and say, we dropped her off. So, my thoughts here are that these earlier instances where she's said, we dropped her off, I believe at this point in time, this is before she realised that detectives were actually looking at her and Stefan. And I believe that it only later became he dropped her off when she realised that detectives were looking a bit more closely. Because don't forget, Jenn is all about appearances. And it seems like she may have wanted to sound more impressive, you know, not the mother who's too lazy to get out of bed to even say goodbye to her daughter, let alone drive her to school, but the mother who's involved with dropping her daughter off to school. Obviously, it doesn't fit with the rest of her story, but I think we've seen Jenn's really, really not good at lying. She is constantly contradicting herself, and this is one of those many times. Now, it could also be the we that she seems to refer to as anything that Stefan does with Maddie. Jenn likes to believe that she was involved. She likes to feel important by saying that she was involved too. I think it indicates that she does feel like a bit of a third wheel, which is really disturbing, not simply because it shows that this grown-ass woman is clearly envious or jealous of her own child, but also if she has to include herself in everything that Maddie and Stefan does by turning it into a we situation, is this her already basically referring to this whole Woody Allen thing? Is it she's very conscious of the fact already that they have a closer relationship than what her and Stearns do? Which of course points to the question of how the heck could she not know what was going on?
So it's typical of him to be able to get her ready in the mornings and drop her to school. Do you all tend to split that responsibility, or what does that look like?
Typically, I do it.
Okay.
This morning, because of my work schedule, because I've been so exhausted, I asked him to take over and do it, and he said he would.
Okay. Has he done it before, though? Like, is he familiar with how to drop her off? And
I'm gonna say he's done it once or twice before. I'm not too sure.
Okay. In the time since he's been back, well, not this time because he's only come back over the weekend, but in the other times, he's done it maybe once or twice.
I'm gonna say yeah.
Is there any reason that he drops her off, or he dropped her off a block away instead of dropping her off to the school?
Because she asked. Because she is embarrassed of his car.
Really? When did she express that?
Multiple times when we've been like, okay, I think Stefan might take you to school or he might pick you up. She goes, can he pick me up far away? Can he leave me here? Like, I don't want to be seen. I'm just like,
What car does he drive? I'm curious.
it's that Buick.
Oh, okay.
But to her, that's an old hoopty car.
Fancy taste, I get it.
So again, we get the typical vagueness from Jenn. Well, he's dropped her off once or twice before. I'm not too sure. Well, if it's once before, I would imagine you'd be pretty certain of that. It would be hard to confuse once with once or twice. I mean, maybe she is just so messed up in the head from all the extra drugs that she takes, who knows. But it seems ridiculous for her to say she's not sure once or twice, and she's not sure of that. And let's just acknowledge that that does not fit with Stefan's story at all. So, interesting. And I don't know, maybe they're both lying. We'll come to that when we listen to Maddie's best friend. Now, who else gets really annoyed when they hear this comment about Maddie being embarrassed by Stefan's car? Because it wasn't even his car. This is the first time ever that he drove that Lincoln. Every other time he's driven that Honda. And yet we get the same comment from both Jenn and Stefan. But Jenn doubles down. And this is the thing that makes me start to think that she definitely is in on all this, and that this is a story concocted between the two of them. Because she says she's embarrassed by his car, or of his car in Jenn's words, because clearly, well, I don't know what goes on in her brain. And when he asks her, when did she express this, Jenn says multiple times. Well, how could she express it multiple times in relation to the Lincoln? Because essentially that's what's going on here. And now we don't have Lincolns in Australia, but I would imagine that when I look at that car, I would consider it as being still a fairly respectable car as compared to a really old clunky Honda or whatever his brown car is. So to be putting them on the same statement, she's expressed this multiple times. Well, maybe she's expressed it multiple times about his old clunker of a car, but she couldn't possibly have expressed it multiple times about the Lincoln. So to me, this makes me think that Jenn is just following the standard story here, and that Maddie may have actually not at any time expressed issues over being driven in Stefan's car. Or it could just be that Maddie has never been dropped off by Stefan before, and this is just a completely made up story to cover for the fact that he didn't drive right to the school because he didn't want to be caught on camera with a deceased Maddie in his car. So instead he drove around the area vaguely and then left, thinking that would be enough of an alibi. And then they're coming up with this story of Maddie being dropped off down the road because of the hoopty. We know from various accounts, and I know I'm probably repeating myself here, but we know Maddie doesn't get dropped off down the road. So, for Jenn to be agreeing with Stearns' story here says to me that she's covering for his stinky ass. And what does that say about her?
I think from what I understood, Orange County got footage of someone by the church in a description of what she was wearing early that morning, just hanging out in the parking lot, and then she got up and left.
Yeah, so the video, they wrote it here, but there was a video of essentially what looks like her at around 8:45, just about that time, walking into that church parking lot that's right near where she got dropped off by Stefan. And it looks like she sits there for about 15 minutes or so and then walks away. So
I'm wondering if it's typical for her to wait at that parking lot too for my stepdad to pick her up from school, so it's not abnormal for her to hang out there.
In that parking lot?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you think of any reason why she might have chosen yesterday morning to wait there? I mean, obviously your stepdad's not picking her up in the morning, but
I wonder if she knew, like, if she had an idea she was super early, so she was just trying to kill time a little bit. But I don't know why she didn't go directly to the school.
yeah.
She should have.
Okay, so I find myself making a mental note there to email Paula and ask if she's actually done a FOIA request for any interviews that may have been done with Jen's stepdad. Because she's claiming that when he picks Maddie up after school, that he picks her up from that car park where the footage is from. But there's nothing in the documents that confirms that. And as far as we know, there isn't an interview with the stepdad that confirms that. And I find it curious, given that why would he pick her up there when Maddie could just walk to Yolanda's office, which we've heard is what she normally does. Now, Jenn once again sidesteps the question here when you actually look at what's gone on here. He's asking her if it's normal for Maddie to hang out there. And she doesn't say it's normal for Maddie to hang out there. She says that she gets picked up after school sometimes there from Jen's stepdad. But she doesn't confirm at any point that Maddie has ever hung out there. As for whether or not Maddie has ever hung out there before school, she avoids that completely. All she says is, oh, maybe she was just hanging around there to kill time. Again, we get this kill time comment, which I really have to say, by the time you hear it multiple times from Jenn and Stefan, you really do have to question whether it is guilty leakage. So she has completely avoided answering here and essentially said maybe she just hung out there to kill time. I don't know why she didn't go straight to school. Saying I don't know why she didn't go straight to school is as close to confirming that Maddie doesn't hang out at that school as Jenn will go. Because Jen's not going to say anything that's going to make Jenn look bad. So instead, the closest she's going to say is, I don't know why she wouldn't go straight to school. Meaning that Maddie has never hung out at that church parking lot before school, ever. But, of course, Jenn can't give a direct answer because Jenn doesn't want to look bad. And of course, at the same time, the reason that she doesn't want to give a direct answer is because she would rather protect Stinky than actually help out with the investigation for her missing daughter. What does that tell you about her knowledge of this case? To me, that says she knows precisely where her daughter is, so there's no need to try and help detectives because she knows that it's too late for them to do anything to help Maddie. That's just my assessment. Maybe I'm being harsh. I know some people have commented in the past that maybe I've become a bit too harsh with Jenn, but this is how I see it. So I honestly think that her lack of concern, her willingness to lie for Stefan, her willingness to basically regurgitate his BS stories, just makes her look guilty.
To let me know that they didn't go to McDonald's as planned. He had asked her multiple times if she wanted to stop at McDonald's because that was the plan the night before. That they were going to wake up early. He was going to take her to McDonald's, do like a special McDonald's breakfast, and then drop her off at school early because she wanted to get there a little early. But on his way to school, she was very sleepy and wanted to sleep in the car. And she said she did not want to do McDonald's. She just wanted to be dropped off.
Now, I just want to point out that that particular interview was the 11:30 one on the 27th of February. Why is that significant? Because just prior to that interview is the period of time, I believe, when her and Stefan were basically sitting in her car for several hours because they were starting to look at the townhouse. They had it locked down, and Jenn and Stefan were basically shut out of the townhouse at that point in time. So they were waiting in Jenn's car outside the townhouse while that was occurring. Plenty of time to work on the story. And what's happening here is that now Jenn has once again evolved her story and introduced that Maddie wanted to get to school early. So she brings in the McDonald's plan and that Maddie wanted to get there early, wanted to get to school early. And she's almost implying here that, well, Maddie nixed the idea of McDonald's so that she could get to school early. Here's the thing. We know that Maddie's best friend catches the bus home from school. I would imagine that she would catch the bus to school also. Now, I tried to access the Find My Bus page for that school. Unfortunately, being in Australia, I don't have access to things like that. So I couldn't figure out what time that Sage's bus would get to school. But I think we can tell from the interviews that Sage has done that she comes from a family where her parents are the kind of parents who are extremely responsible, who take an active role in their child's welfare, and who are unlikely, let's say we know that they are business people, let's say that they drop her off at school on their way to work of a morning. Well, I'm not sure that that would be the case because the school doesn't start till 9:28, so I'd imagine their business starts up earlier than that. And I think he's like a business manager, he's a project manager. So her father has an important role. Her mother works in the same business, so you would expect them to travel together. So I would imagine that she would bus to school of a morning rather than have them allow her to be at school early. So my roundabout way of what I'm saying there is that I have no doubt whatsoever that Sage's parents are not the sort of parents who would want her to be hanging around early for school. They would, I mean, these are parents who don't allow her to have social media. So they certainly wouldn't be allowing her to be hanging around the neighbourhood at the school early in the morning. So given that this is Maddie's best friend, I would imagine that, yeah, Maddie's got other friends, but not as close as that. And when you hear Sage talking about we waited for her at the gate or whatever, then it sounds like, you know, it is standard for them to wait around the time that Maddie would normally be dropped off. So I call BS on this sudden introduction of Maddie wanting to get to school early, because her friends would not have been at school early to hang out with her. This, to me, makes it look like Jenn is definitely changing her story here to fit in with the stories that Stearns has been telling.
I just recently, that's the biggest reason I even called Stefan, was to come help me this week with her getting her to school, helping with the dog. That's the whole reason I even called him, was to come help me.
Okay, breaking that down, because that is one of the statements that really bugs me. First of all, she doesn't need Stefan to help her with the dog. She has a 13-year-old daughter who would be more than capable of walking the dog. And in fact, in the interview with the neighbours, they mentioned that they had seen Maddie walking the dog over that weekend. So, why? Just why would she need him to come and help with the dog? Well, you could say, oh, well, you know, if Maddie's at school and Jen's at work and that's long hours, maybe she needs him to help with the dog then. But let's not forget that the week before all this happened, Jenn was already doing this new job. Maddie was at school, and Maddie was staying with her grandmother, who was looking after the dog then. So I don't buy this story of Stefan having to come to look after the dog. And as for him having to help her with Maddie to get Maddie to school, well, it seems, here's the thing. It seems like, first of all, her shifts are late ones that finish at like 10:30. Maybe the shifts change from day to day. But either way, it could only be an issue with either pick up or drop off. If it's an issue with both, why can't you just go with what you normally go with and have Maddie stay with her grandmother or go to her grandmother's house? I don't buy this story of her doing this to spend more time with Maddie, because it just doesn't make sense. How much time did she spend with Maddie that weekend? Supposedly half an hour. I say supposedly, you know my views on that. I'm not even sure that she saw Maddie on the Sunday night. So this reeling out the story about Stefan helping her with Maddie is just insane. I mean, even if she's like, well, I wanted to see more of her, she has flatmates. She has a sister who lives just round the corner from her. She was happy enough for Maddie to be dropped off after her party at 8:30 and be at home without Jenn there for 2 hours before Jenn got home. So why could she not organise, even if she organises for Maddie to go and have dinner at her sister's place and then be dropped home closer to bedtime so that Jenn can see Maddie or something. But the other side of that is she had 2 days off. So the timing of him turning up doesn't even make sense. She didn't need to sleep in the following morning. She was just being lazy. So none of this story makes sense to me.
He said he went, I think he had given me a timeline of, he dropped her off somewhere between 8:20 and 8:45, but he's not sure exactly what time.
Okay.
He said they were making good time that morning. He was like super impressed with how quickly she got up, got ready, and was out the door. I know she wanted to meet up with her friends at school early. And I know
Did she tell you that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know she wanted McDonald's early that morning for breakfast.
Mhm.
But Stephan said she was asleep in the car for the majority of the car ride, and he kept trying to talk to her and talk her into getting McDonald's. But she kept saying, no, just drop me off.
So now she's even claiming that Maddie told her that she wanted to get there early and meet with her friends. So I'm wondering when that occurred, because she tells us she never saw Maddie that morning. So is that just another thing that happened in that really, really long, stretched out half-an-hour block of time the night before? Sometime between Jenn sitting on her own in her bedroom and having her pub sub sandwich, and then watching part of Sister Act with Maddie and Stefan, and then counting Maddie's money and talking about Maddie's presents, and, oh yeah, talking about all the food that Maddie had at her birthday, and talking about Maddie going to Macca's as a birthday treat, and having a discussion with Stefan about her needing to get her blood work done the following morning. She crammed a lot into that half-hour period of time, didn't she? And like I said just before, we know Maddie's friends wouldn't have been at the school early anyway. Certainly not before 9 o'clock, which is the time frame that Jenn is so calmly discussing here. There's no way that Maddie's friends would have been at school that early. And from memory, I think the guidelines, the handbook for the school, essentially says that kids shouldn't be dropped off at the school before 9 o'clock. There's no one there to offer supervision for the children. And yet Jenn is quite calm in accepting this notion of Maddie wanting to be there that early. I don't buy it. I don't buy any of this stuff that's being said. Now, one thing, when you listen to the way she talks about the Maddie sleeping all the way there and refusing McDonald's breakfast, this is a child who we know from other interviews, they established in the immunity interview that Maddie is one of those kids who does have breakfast every morning. Now, here's the thing. If you were a parent and you knew that your child normally had breakfast every morning, and your child supposedly wanted to be dropped off at school early, and Stinky Stern says to you, well, I offered for her to get breakfast at Macca's, but she wasn't interested and she was just sleeping the whole way there and just wanted to be dropped off early. Wouldn't you be concerned about the welfare of your child? Wouldn't you be wanting to ring the school and say, look, I'm just a little bit concerned because my daughter's come to school without breakfast, and apparently, even though it was the morning, she slept the whole way there in the car. And yet this is no concern for Jenn. We don't hear her mention Stefan's stupid story about giving Maddie this magical pastry that he had happened to produce out of thin air in the car. That's not mentioned at all. So basically, she's saying that it's perfectly fine with her for her daughter to have been dropped off at school early before the time when the school is normally open, before anyone is there for supervision for students. Not only that, but dropped off early without any breakfast. Jenn would have to know that Maddie's friends actually wouldn't have been there early, because she would know at least what Sage's movements are, surely. I doubt that Maddie had ever been dropped off early to meet with her friends early, and I would have loved to have heard that as one of the questions for Maddie's friends, because I'm pretty certain the answer would be no, we've never met early. So there's so many things here that Jen's saying that just don't add up.
Do you take her to school?
Yeah.
Okay. And when you take her to school, where do you drop her off at?
At the school.
Okay, so you pull in through the line and drop her off at the front and stuff like
Yeah.
that. When she goes to school, when you take her to school, is she talkative in the car, or what does she do on the way there?
Not really. She'll be on her phone. We'll listen to the radio station, or listen to some Taylor Swift. Yeah, she's pretty quiet. Or she'll be snoozing, sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jenn actually slipped up there and she realised what she did. And I'll come to that in a minute. But first of all, the question is, do you drop her off? And she's like, yeah. Where do you drop her off? At the school. And he clarifies, like, do you go through the drop-off line and drop her at the front of the line? She's like, yes. So it's quite clear that Maddie is accustomed to being dropped off at the school. Jenn has not said here that, oh, sometimes I'll drop her off down the road so she can meet with her friends and walk because she likes to walk. You know, that BS story that Stephan gave. But here's where Jenn shows guilt to me, in my opinion. Because she's talking about what Maddie does in the car on the way to school. And she says, well, she'll be on her phone, or we'll listen to the radio, or Taylor Swift, or she'll be a bit quiet. And then, obviously, she's realised she's just completely screwed up the narrative completely here, because we're supposed to believe that she's the kind of kid that'll get in the car and go to sleep on the way to school. So Jenn throws that in as an afterthought. Or she'll be snoozing, sleeping. I honestly believe that she's realised, as she's said it, what she's done here. She's basically contradicted the whole story of Maddie sleeping in the car. They've caught her in a lie. And she has done the typical Jenn thing and tried to recover from it by tacking that on at the end of what she was saying.
I offered her McDonald's multiple times, but she refused. So she asked to be dropped off early. And so he did.
Does she ever go to school? Does she ever ask to go? Because sometimes kids don't want to go to school, period. Is it normal for her to ask to be dropped off early?
Yes, sometimes.
Okay.
She's asked me multiple times to ask her to drop her off early. She wants to meet up with her friends, or she wants to get there earlier and earlier just to meet up with her or with her friends.
But you still drop her off at the school?
Yes.
Okay. So she hangs out with her friends within the school?
Yes.
Okay.
The only reason I think he did not take her to school directly that morning is because she has voiced multiple times, hey, is Stephan taking me to school? Can you please drop me off far away? She's embarrassed by his car. It's a Cadillac, it's not that old, but to her it's an old hoopty. She can't be seen in it. She doesn't want to be seen in it. So she's made that comment before, please drop me off far away, I want to walk.
So even in just a really short period of time, she can't get her story straight. He asks her if she drops Maddie off early sometimes, or if she drops Maddie off early, and she says sometimes, and then changes it to multiple times. Well, is it sometimes or multiple times? Because they're not two things that you can confuse. They're not interchangeable. Sometimes infers maybe once a month, very, very occasionally. Multiple times infers that it's something that happens quite frequently, maybe even once a week. And we'll go back to what I said before, the school's not open overly early. Maddie's friends bus in. Why is she going to get there early? I don't buy it. I also don't buy Jenn being organised enough to get Maddie there early of a morning. Because, let's face it, Jenn's not exactly super mum. And she totally trips herself up talking about the car this time. Because she once again does she's embarrassed by his car story. And then she specifically refers to the Lincoln. So she's basically saying that Maddie has expressed on numerous occasions that she's embarrassed by his car and she wants to be dropped far away. And she says it's because the car is a Lincoln. We know that's a lie. We know that he only drove the Lincoln that one time. So why does she need to lie? If she was concerned about her daughter being missing, and she was more concerned about that than covering up for Stephan, why the lie? I think when we start to break down what is being said here about the school drop-off, she is lying for Stephan about the school drop-off. To me, that screams guilty knowledge. Why protect him? Why come out with these blatantly obvious lies when her daughter is missing? She should be worrying about where her daughter is. She should be questioning why the heck did he drop her off supposedly a mile from the school or however many blocks from the school. Why was she supposedly sleeping the whole way there? Why did he drop her off and she didn't have breakfast? All these things, you don't hear that from her. Instead, she has to back up Stearns' story even though she knows it's a lie.
Now, if your daughter had been awake, would she come in and say goodbye to you before school or not? Just let you sleep?
I would have hoped she would have come by and say goodbye to me. I can't remember if this is one of the first times that Stephan actually took her to school, so I would have hoped she would have said good night, but I'm not sure.
So here we have Jenn in the derivative use interview. And after all these other stories that she's said, now she says, I can't remember if this is one of the first times that Stephan took her to school. Well, she's just basically admitted that she lied here. Because how could Maddie have expressed multiple times that she didn't want to be dropped anywhere near the school by Stefan because she was embarrassed by his car, if that was actually one of the first times that Maddie had been dropped at school by Stefan? She's tried to, or the pair of them have tried to convince this whole narrative of it being commonplace for Stefan to drop Maddie at school, commonplace for him to drop Maddie some distance from the school because she's embarrassed by her car. And yet now in the derivative use interview, when essentially she can be prosecuted if she lies, and she did lie, I will just say that. But here, the story changes to this has probably been one of the first times. Which is saying that all this other stuff about needing to be dropped off far from the school, being embarrassed by his car, is a lie. And if all that stuff is a lie, why did she go with Stearns' lie? And why did their stories agree? Because their interviews were all separate after that first body cam one. And yet, they both gave the same lie about Stefan having taken Maddie to school several times. Stefan over-exaggerates more than Jenn. She gradually trims it back. But essentially, they've both come up with this same BS story about him driving Maddie to school and it being a commonplace thing for Maddie wanting him to drop her off far away because of her embarrassment over the car. And Jenn has essentially just said, that's all a lie. Because at this point in time, Stefan's in jail. She doesn't need to protect him anymore. She needs to protect Jenn. How do you protect Jenn? Well, you're not going to continue with what is a very, very obvious lie, because she knows that at this point in time, they know that Stefan didn't drop Maddie at school. They know that Stefan didn't take Maddie, or attempt to take Maddie, to go to get Macca's. So, essentially, the lie is no longer convenient for Jenn. So instead she's going to say, well, this is probably one of the first times that he took her to school. So we're throwing out all the stuff about the embarrassment over the car and, you know, all that other crap. If she had to lie in those previous interviews, for me that says guilty knowledge.
All right. So you just started this job at Disney Coronado Springs like a week or two earlier, is that right?
Yes.
And your sister and other family members would help with Maddie getting to school because of your job?
Yes, my mom and my sister, yes.
Okay. Why is it that now Stefan on February 26th is coming up to help as opposed to any of your family members helping getting Madeline to school?
I had asked for him to come and help me because I think I was working a lot of night shifts or like really late shifts, and I just wanted the opportunity to see Maddie, like, because I wanted to spend more time with my daughter throughout the week while I was working, versus had she had stayed at my mom's, I wouldn't have seen her all week.
Okay.
So that was just me wanting to see her and spend time with her.
Now, he pretty much nailed her here. He's essentially said, you know, you'd already started working and, you know, what your mum and your sister were helping you with Maddie. So why the change? And can I just point out that he said, and your sister, meaning that Stephanie, who lived only a block or so away from Jenn, must have been picking Maddie up from Jenn's house to take her to school. in which case Jenn must have been seeing Maddie at some point in time. But her response starts with, I think. Well, huge neon sign there saying, I'm about to lie. When you say you think something, that means, okay, now I need to think of a really good story to come up with here. You either know it as a fact, or you're thinking on your toes, essentially. When someone says, I think, before they say something, it's a huge red flag. It means that they're not telling the truth. So she's like, I think I wanted the opportunity to see more of Maddie. Notice also the lack of fluency in what she's saying there. She's thinking on her toes. She's trying to come up with a good excuse for why she had invited Stefan there. And she's trying to figure out how to make it sound reasonable. Well, here's the biggest question that I've had for a long time. She didn't work the Monday. She didn't work the Tuesday. So she wasn't going to need to work again till the Wednesday. From what we can tell, she was working later in the day. She could have gotten up half an hour earlier on the Monday morning to take Maddie to school, to actually spend time with her daughter. She claims she wanted to spend time with her daughter, but she couldn't be bothered getting out of bed to even say good morning to her. Instead, she just wanted to sleep right through, not even bother saying good morning to her daughter, and let Stefan take her daughter to school without her even seeing her. So, essentially, she supposedly got to see her half an hour the night before she was taken to school. Well, that doesn't make sense to me. And if you've got 2 days off, why, like I said, get up half an hour early so you can take your daughter to school and spend time with her then. Pick her up after school yourself. Well, there's time with her. Take her to school the following morning. Pick her up the following afternoon. Take her to school Wednesday morning. There you go. You've got half a week with her. Then have her stay Wednesday night and Thursday night with your mother. Or if you are working late, you've got flatmates, you are happy for her to come home and be at home without you there on the Sunday night, why can't you have someone pick her up from school and drop her home, even if she went to Yolanda's after work, had dinner at Yolanda's place, and then someone dropped her home after that, so that that Jenn could see her after work? It just makes no sense. And if it was such a concern of her wanting to have Stefan help with the runs so she could see more of Maddie because of work, why not have him arrive on Wednesday after her days off? Because she did not need him. It wasn't about her wanting more time with Maddie. It was about her being a lazy ass, wanting to sleep in, probably didn't want to actually let her family realise how much of a lazy ass she was. Maybe there was criticism from the family of the fact that she was so bloody lazy. So, hide the fact that you're too lazy to get out of bed. How do you do that? Get the ex-boyfriend to come and drive your daughter to school so the family doesn't know that even though you've got a day off, you're not getting your ass out of bed to drive your own daughter to school. Okay, so we've heard from Jenn and Stefan about these school runs. So, what do others say about the situation? I'm going to start with Maddie's best friend, and then I'm going to play a little bit from Jen's flatmate so that we can see exactly how others see the situation.
Who normally brings... Has he ever brought her to school that you know of?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Do you have a reason why he would have brought her to school? Never brought her to school?
She's a sub here, and then I don't know if she still is. And then she also works at Disney.
So what we have here is the best friend saying that he's not, to her, the best of her knowledge, that Stefan has not ever dropped Maddie at school. The question was, has he ever brought her to school? And her answer was, not to my knowledge. Would she know? Yes. Because her and her friends wait for Maddie to get to school. They all meet up when Maddie gets to school. So she would see every day who drops Maddie at school. I think the question that was deleted there was basically, is there a reason why he might drop Maddie at school? Maybe, I'm guessing that's what the question was, because she refers to Jen's new job with the Disney hotel. But it's really telling to hear from Maddie's best friend that, to the best of her knowledge, he hasn't ever dropped Maddie at school.
Okay. So then you come to school.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened?
I got to school, and me and our friend group were kind of just like hanging around, like kind of where the entrance is, waiting for her to get to school because she's a walker. So we kind of just like waited near the entrance for her to come in. We were already on campus. We were already like in like the gates and stuff. We were kind of just like waiting for her to get there, and then when she didn't show up, we were like, okay, well, sometimes she'll like wake up a little late, and then she'll come during first period.
Sometimes she'll wake a little late and she'll come during first period. So does that mean that perhaps if Jenn had a blood work appointment to which she got to the location, like the blood core place, she got there shortly before 10 for a 10:15 appointment? Seems like it is acceptable for Jenn for Maddie to be dropped off at school late. So, given that she had this blood work appointment and she was basically in the vicinity of the school within about half an hour of when Maddie was meant to be at school, if she was that set on having a sleep in, couldn't she have just dropped Maddie off late like she normally does? Just a thought. Now, here's where you get the mention of them meeting Maddie at the gate. She refers to Maddie being a walker, but I think she's basically looking at that probably from the week before when Maddie was staying at Yolanda's place, because she probably did walk from the office to get to school. Or is she just a little bit confused because in another spot she actually talks about Jenn dropping Maddie off. So, and we will come to that.
But she didn't say if she dropped her off at school.
No. She said she dropped her off to church and then left.
You that? I'm just writing this down because I will forget because we've talked about a lot of things. Okay. Told you that she was the one that dropped
her off.
Okay.
Again, we have the story with Jenn saying that she was the one who dropped Maddie off and claiming that she dropped her off near the church. It just seems to me that was going to be the original story. until they started looking at Stearns. And it seems to me that perhaps that's when Jenn decided to separate herself from the situation and basically put it all back on Stearns. I was still asleep. He dropped Maddie off. And we know that it was only him in the car with Maddie. So I don't know why she would have said in the first place that she dropped Maddie off, or they dropped Maddie off, other than to try and sound like the good parent. Maybe she thought that lying to a 13-year-old wouldn't be followed up on. Maybe she thought that she could lie to Sage and say that she dropped Maddie off and still sound like the good parent, because, well, who would believe a 13-year-old? Well, you know what? I believe Sage over Jenn any day.
Because instead of going exactly a car line.
Is that normal?
No, I don't think so. You like straight dropped off in the front of the school.
Okay.
Car line.
But yesterday, for some random reason, she wanted to be dropped off at the church.
I don't know if she's ever been dropped off at church before. No, she has told me.
Okay.
I don't know if she's ever been dropped off at the church before. Not that she's told me. This is after she said that it's not normal for Maddie to be dropped off there. I know it's hard to pick it up around all the redactions, but essentially she said, no, it's not normal for Maddie to be dropped off there. She's normally dropped off at the front of the car line. And then she's basically said, she's confirmed that it's, it doesn't happen. As far as she knows, Maddie's never been dropped off there before. So why now? And like I said, this is Maddie's best friend. This is the person who meets Maddie every day when Maddie gets to school. I think she would know. And I think we've established that Maddie told her quite a lot of things and shared a lot with her. So I trust her judgment. 13 is well and truly old enough to actually have a solid understanding of these things. So I trust her judgment, and I do believe her that Maddie's never been dropped off away from the school before. So why did Jenn support the lie? Because that's what's happening here. Jenn has backed up Stefan's lie. Jenn knew it was a lie, and yet she repeated it in her interviews. I'm just going to play one more audio clip to finish it off. And, well, this one's pretty self-explanatory, but I will have my little comment at the end.
If there's anything else important you think it could help me find her?
So it's just weird, like, he typically doesn't drop her off. It's just like a whole bunch of coincidences. So I don't know.
Okay.
It's just weird.
So according to Natalie, it's just weird. All the coincidences, and he typically doesn't drop her off. Typically, you could interpret it as typically it wouldn't happen, and maybe it has happened once before, I don't know. But for her to say it's weird, to me, infers that perhaps in this instance what she's saying is he typically doesn't drop her off, as in she's not aware of it having happened in the past. So this goes back to the question of, why did Jenn support Stefan's lies? Not only did Jenn support Stefan's lies, but she repeated Stefan's lies to the detectives in her own interviews. This from a mother whose child is missing and should be wanting to cooperate in every way possible with detectives in order to find where her daughter has gotten to. The fact that she was supporting his lies and repeating his lies, surely that can only mean guilty knowledge, and she was helping cover for his actions. So I'm going to leave it on that thought. I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on this. Does this whole narrative about the drop-off, does this prove that Jenn had guilty knowledge? Or is it just maybe Jenn getting a little bit confused? Or maybe I'm just reading too much into this. Really keen to hear your thoughts on this. So if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button. Help me to grow my channel, get it out in the algorithm some more. And as I've said, please do leave a comment. I look forward to reading all your comments. I do my best to respond to as many as possible. Of course, that is depending on whether or not comments are turned off. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, if comments are turned off, I will be going back in and turning them back on for you, so you can always return later and leave a comment. If comments are on, please help me to keep them on by even just leaving a little love heart for Maddie in the comments section, because I found that once you get so many comments in there, YouTube is less likely to turn them back off again. So, on that note, thank you, and I will catch you in the next one. I begin to wonder